Welcome to this video, and thank you for watching. I hope you're doing well. It's been a very strange year, for sure. And hopefully you've found a way to be creative and stay focused. And that's something I think that maybe should be talked about. And I haven't really seen anything within this realm that made me feel inspired or activated creatively. Though it's been a very creative year and a very creative time, I think it might be helpful. If anything, I'm just a guy who makes videos and music, so take it with a grain of salt. But I know it's easy to feel trapped as a person, as a human being, as someone who has a brain that's constantly telling you, like, hey, you're gonna die. And 2020 was certainly an exercise in really getting comfortable with that. So where do we start? I suppose it makes the most sense to start where we last left off. This is kind of interesting because I don't typically speak out of character, or at least I haven't in 10 years or more. I've never really been on the internet, like, as a human. It was always, the idea was, propel someone else front and center, and this is the hero. I grew up watching professional wrestling, so this was like a very kind of common thing. You've got the hero and it's clear, so we need to make it like really clear, like, this is the person who can do no wrong, even if behind the scenes they're like a demon, but on camera they're perfect. Was it Glenda, the Good Witch on The Wizard of Oz? And so that was kind of the way I saw it as a producer or a director, to say, okay, well, we've got the good guy or the good girl, and here it is. And for the viewer, the audience, they'll think like, okay, this is great. So then the natural next step as someone who makes something is like, oh, well, we need a bad guy or a bad person. And so I was like, well, I'll be that. And well, that'll catch up to you. and sometimes that's just the way it is, which is fine. I've certainly paid the price to a certain degree in that, and learned from it for sure. And out of necessity, there was kind of this idea to tell stories with nothing, because that's how it was. If you're watching this, you probably are somewhat familiar with things that I've made in the past, and that was done with nothing, literally nothing. I have more right now in this setup with multiple cameras and good lights and good lenses and all that stuff. I didn't have that, and the things that I've done that have been the most successful were literally done with a $500 camera, which is this one right here. Not expensive, and I don't know, I think like being from Michigan and being very influenced by like Jack White and kind of the punk rock idea, all this Detroit punk rock stuff, it had an influence for me visually, the music element too, but a lot of the music I like is more typically British for what I like, but that's just, or Japanese. That's semantics, but it's the mentality. It's this idea of like, well, work with what you have and make it look or sound as good as it can be. And I didn't know anyone in Hollywood. I didn't know anyone in entertainment. I didn't know anyone in New York City or any of these like important places. And so I really kind of held true to that whole, I always loved the whole fake it till you make it idea. And that's what I did like for a long time. And so moved to Los Angeles, did the whole thing, networked and met all the people. And, it was just kind of, it felt like ladder climbing, and it's weird. And we'll get into like why I left at a later time, but it was all very material, and it was ladder climbing, and all the people, and this is funny for anyone watching this who's, still climbing the ladders. I get it. I get why you're doing it. Cha-ching, money's great. But as a human being, as a person, and as someone who's, I like entertaining for sure, and I think it's fun and exciting, but over the years, getting more and more into like songwriting, I've found it's more impactful to communicate small ideas with beautiful sounds or images. And that's kind of if you want to break through the skin and the ribs and the tissues and all that stuff and get right to the heart, it's with a song or a video, an idea, something creative. And it just increasingly became something that was not creative, and it was just about money, and it was just $, $. And some people are into that, and that's totally cool. I get it. You need money, but it just increasingly, the thing that was fun and exciting just became stressful. I felt like a job, and the people who were the closest, I started to realize like, oh, you just don't care about you don't care what you're saying or putting out or whatever. It's content, it's feed for the people, the civilians. And I got weirded out. And so I left. That's in simple terms. That was, this is kind of bringing it back to the professional wrestling analogy, which I think is great. You have the hero, you have the heel. I put myself out there as a heel. You reap what you sow, and I'm very understanding of that. And there's been a considerable amount of therapy and professional help there to realize, because I put myself there in the first place, to cover up my own insecurities and to propel myself like, oh, I'm like a big man, and I'm a genius, and I'm a creative, and all that stuff. And now I know why I was in that headspace, because I had to prove to myself that I was worthy or, good at what I did, even though constantly you get bombarded with people telling you how great these things that you do are. And, it's funny because with the internet, especially now, you can get thousands and thousands of those messages. And then there's the one person who, that's the one that people listen to. And I think that kind of explains a lot of why having gone through what I've gone through, which I understand. And for people watching this, like, I get it. Like, let's go back to the wrestling thing. Like, I told you, like, I'm a bad guy and I'm the evil thing. And I'm not saying I'm a good guy. I've made my mistakes for sure. And I'm just a human being. But I understand why people feel that way to a degree that at least I'm like, okay, I get it. Like, yeah, that makes sense. And so I kind of had to take a break and just step away from the social media aspect of it all. And interestingly enough, that just influenced me to write more music and creatively get into a place that I hadn't been in a very, very long time. Probably, I don't know, 10 years. And obviously that was like influenced significantly by the whole coronavirus thing. I'd been on tour for about like probably 5 years, or at least involved in one project every day, writing songs, producing songs, editing videos, shooting, producing videos, directing the music videos. What do I say in this interview? We have to be in New York. We have to be in LA. We're in London, Paris. It's Fashion Week. Hey, figure out how to be a kid from Michigan and handle Fashion Week. You're in Tokyo, sleeping on airplanes, being terrified of airplanes your entire life, and then suddenly forced into being on airplanes all the time. And then suddenly all of the craziness and all of the everything comes to a screeching halt. This business that you've spent half a decade, every day, all day, it's all you think about. And then it's just to a halt. And it's like, decisions were made. Flip it over. Let's just do the opposite of what's working. That's how I saw it. And I thought, oh, okay, well, that's something that's going to take me probably a long time to understand. But people will takes a lot of pressure to make a diamond. And so at the end of all of that, it was kind of like, okay, well, reassess. And I thought I was starting over. And by the way, anyone who is watching this and has any sort of apprehensions or embarrassment about going to therapy or talking to a therapist, or in general, just talking to someone about the challenges of life, I would highly recommend just talk to someone. Talking to a professional is probably a good idea. It's very helpful. I was one of these dudes, I'm from Michigan and I'm blue collar and, grew up around, strong men who, everyone hunts in my family and they gut their own deers and they gut their own deer. And there's this idea about manliness, and for some reason, I don't get it. Talking to a therapist is like shunned, or at least it has been. I'm a little bit older, probably older than a lot of people watching this, but that's what I felt. But it was good to talk to someone. and really understand kind of, what was going on, and to have someone really point out and help me shed like the narcissism, the ego. Really, that's what it is. Yeah, mushrooms help too. But just to kind of get rid of all of these ideas about who we think we are and how we present ourselves, and I'm this and I'm that. Just get rid of that, man. Like, just get out of that shell that we create for ourselves, and that's kind of the thing right there. One of the things that my therapist said, and she's a gem, and, I was just really stuck on this idea of like, well, I'm starting over. I got to start over. I thought I was starting from scratch, but she said something along the lines of like, well, you're not starting over. You're not starting from scratch. You're starting from experience. And I was just like, oh. Because especially at that point, like, I had traveled the world. I'd flown around the world multiple times and been to places I had never even heard of. And that was really cool to hear someone from the outside at least acknowledge that, because it's something I've had trouble with for a long time. You want to be acknowledged for things. And I went about that in a weird way for a long time. I thought strangers on the internet were the way to get recognition or fame or attention or whatever. Then I kind of like broke it down, and it was like, oh, well, what do I want my parents to think that about me? Do I want my friends to think about that about me? And it just gets lower and lower and lower. And it was for me, and that's another thing for anyone watching who's interested in therapy. Like, you got to get to know you, and I was running away from myself for so long. And it's weird listening back, all the music I've written, all these songs, and like just, someone who's always like been very, very, very invested in like the emotions behind a song. And I would lean into it in a weird way that I don't think was healthy for me. And though the music I'm working on now is highly emotional and hyper emotional, if you will, still there was like a perspective shift where it was coming from an ego place. It was like a very egotistical, this idea like, oh, I have something to prove or whatever it was. And, I had thought it was like, oh, I have something to prove to like my father. And then, Freudian as it is, I was like, oh, then I realized like, oh, you just don't like yourself, man. You don't love yourself. That was the kicker right there. Like, yeah, you don't love yourself, dude. And I didn't hate myself, but I didn't love myself. I think that there's a distinction there. And, yeah, that one hit real hard. And that kind of explains the past year of my life to a certain degree, figuring that out. And interestingly enough, once you learn how to love yourself, or at least accept yourself, that's how you know how to love. And the things that I thought I loved prior to this past year, I would say, were very material, and it was ego driven. You get into relationships in life sometimes, and I think if a relationship that you're in if the basis of it is to propel yourself, that's not the right idea. And that was never, I can say confidently, like, I never went into a relationship thinking like, oh, well, this will help me, or this will bring me to this point that I want to get to. But there were elements of that, for sure, that were just like little remnants that were there. And it's almost like, I hate that this is the analogy because I don't do drugs anymore, but I don't even smoke weed anymore. But it makes me think of like if you do smoke weed and you use a grinder, you know, you get the good at the bottom, and, you know, just like the remnants of the, you know, the potent stuff that collects at the bottom. And that's kind of the analogy maybe I would use. Here we are talking real now. Hello. The keef, that residue, even though it's small, it's microscopic to a certain degree. That's the most potent. And I think when you're not being completely true to yourself, and I'm not claiming to be completely true to myself at this point, I'm still working on it. I'm sure I'll be working on it for the rest of my life. But at this point in my life, I'm at least aware of what to look at and understand and say, oh, yeah, that's a very small but very potent part of myself that it's probably not the best. And over this past year, it's been very beneficial and I think very helpful to have that kind of cleanse. And I almost feel like the world in general has maybe felt that, just being stuck at home, which has been a real weird thing. So about a year ago, what is it? Well, this will be coming out, Monday? So I'm coming up on a birthday, which is always interesting. Maybe that's why I'm doing this. You always have these like reflections on the year when your birthday happens. And it doesn't matter what time of the year. Mine happens to be in February. I'm an Aquarius. And maybe that's just me, but I think for the most part, people reflect on that significantly, and you kind of look back at like, where was I a year ago and what was I doing? And 1 year ago, I was ready to leave LA. I'd been in LA for almost a decade, and I was like, yeah, I think I get it. I get it. You know, I went there with a dream that I didn't understand, and then I fulfilled that. And fulfilling your own dreams, it's kind of like a double-edged sword, or maybe like a candle burning at both ends. And I think because of the opportunities that I was presented with, and the significant things that led me to be able to meet my heroes, and then kind of realizing like, oh man, all of you are miserable. That was very influential for me to be like, oh, hell, I feel crazy. For sure. I feel like a crazy person. But I didn't really feel crazy until I got to this crazy place. And you look around and it's like, oh, well, everyone else is crazy. So you justify it. Or at least you protect yourself. You shield yourself from the craziness. I guess I got to a point where I never thought I'd be in Warsaw, Poland. I never thought I would see Paris or London, Tokyo, Shanghai, any of the, like, just around the whole world. I never thought I'd see the world. For the longest time in my life, I was terrified of flying. Never thought I would ever fly internationally, that's for sure. And when you are on the road, or if you've toured in any capacity, or just lived that lifestyle, either as a musician or a comedian, or even just for work or whatever it is, you realize how small the world is. I remember a good friend of mine who traveled the world when he was probably 16, 17, like high school, or just out of high school, maybe 18. And he's a good friend of mine and was a roommate of mine in LA, right on Sunset. And I remember the first time I traveled overseas, and he was like, "Hey, the world feels smaller, doesn't it?" And I got it. I was like, "Oh, yeah, man. Like, it is a small world. Like, they're not lying when they say that." I just remember thinking like, "Oh, like everything has changed." And you get back from tour, or at least in my case, it was tour, playing shows and that whole lifestyle. And I was never the person to think, to me, it was about like handling it. And it was like, oh, I can handle anything. I can handle this and it's fine. No one can handle that. Or at least live a convincing lifestyle in real life. I'm not talking about like what people like put out there. You have to realize like what people say on social media, it's very different from what's really going on. And you know this, but when it comes to like the celebrities, it's always very striking when you meet someone who has this like big, rambunctious, like positive lifestyle, and I'm the best and this and that. And then you meet him in real life and you're like, oh, holy shit. Like, you are not okay. I think that really boiled up. And there's always this kind of down period after getting off of a tour. To me, it's like a depression, and like I've dealt with depression my whole life. I'll never understand it. It's a lifetime worth of figuring out. I don't think we'll ever figure out what depression is, why people get it. I've had a very good life. Very privileged, very good family, great friends, my entire life. At this point, I don't know. I don't know what it is. And I know a lot of people feel it. And that goes hand in hand with anxiety. That's a whole nother video. We'll get to that. Dealing with it and coping with it and finding a way to feel comfortable and be normal that's a process for sure. And I haven't found any sort of medication or coping mechanism other than having good friends and good family that really help that. So take that with a grain of salt. I'm just a human being. I don't know. But I do understand it's a strange thing to deal with. And getting off of a tour or any sort of high, the come down's always horrible. You know, anyone who's done Molly or, well, drugs will be another video too. But, you know, what goes up must come down. And one of the biggest highs is being on tour and living that lifestyle. And I always thought, definitely while touring the U.S., it always felt comfortable when I was in the South. Even though I'm from Michigan, I suppose you would say I'm a northerner, which really gets a strange stigma about it. Northern people are nice. You ever met a Canadian? Jeez, Michigan's pretty much Canada. But I always felt comfortable in Texas for whatever reason. I think the first time I was in Texas was South by Southwest. That would have been maybe 2011, 2012, one of the two. I just remember seeing a sunset. I drove from LA to play some shows in Austin. And everyone was either probably, asleep or just dozing off or doing their thing on their phones or whatever. And I just remember for like an hour, maybe 2 hours, there was a different sunset, which is ironic because I used to live on Sunset in Los Angeles, and people always say, oh my God, California and sunsets, the Sunset Strip and all that stuff. It's like, yeah, it's fine. Maybe I'm desensitized to it. I don't know. But it was different. And just the blues and the pinks, and it looked like a sherbet. The oranges and yellows, and they all blended together. And it was just a beautiful, and the cool thing is, this is, people maybe who haven't been to LA before, which by the way, LA geographically is very similar to Barcelona. The only place in the world, I've seen a lot of places, not all of them, but a significant amount. Barcelona feels like LA. Or shall I say, I should probably say LA feels like Barcelona. But the thing about California, it's hard to appreciate a sunset in California if you're not on the beach. Because it's very hilly, and for a long time I lived in the valley. I lived in Hollywood. I lived in Silver Lake, Echo Park, and all that. The sunset always gets obscured by the hills. And where I grew up, it was very flat up in Michigan, and I think that is being able to see the horizon. That was something over approximately a decade of being in Los Angeles I really started to miss. And so this is kind of a roundabout way of getting back to driving to South by Southwest, back when you could go to shows and play shows. I just remember how flat it was, and it just seemed to go on forever. And the sun hit different. It was literally hitting at like a different angle, and it was just gorgeous. And this is one of the worst times in my life. Everything was falling apart. But you have those moments of novelty where you can have that one moment, whether it's a sunset or you take a great bite of food or hug your parents or a friend or whatever it is. And that always stuck with me. And so then, fast forward, 8 years or whatever it was. And you see the whole world. or most of you see the world, and you just kind of remember, like, where did you feel at home? And although home will always be Michigan for sure, there's a special place in my heart. And to be quite frank, the Midwest in general, but I just knew after spending that much time away from winter, I'm not ready. And everyone north of, I don't know, Tennessee, like, you can let me know in the comments how much of a, wimp I am now. I get it. Hey, sorry, spent a long time in paradise. And I just, let me put it this way. The first year I lived in LA, I remember hearing Christmas music for the first time in LA, in like a Target or something. And I'm like leaving the store, and I remember bracing, and anyone who lives in the Midwest knows this. I remember just kind of like the doors are about to open at the store. And I remember bracing and being like, here it comes. And it's just that chill. And people in the South, I've talked to plenty of Southerners, and they have no clue what I'm talking about. And it's like, no, it's the impact of like the cold. And I remember being in LA, and, it's like a psychological thing. Like, you're in the store, you hear the Christmas music. It's like, oh, it's cold out. And then I remember bracing, and that didn't happen. I was like, oh, this must be like, okay. And I felt like, I felt expensive or something, which is dumb because I was pretty poor that first year. I was maybe more poor than I've been. No, I wasn't that poor, but I didn't have money. Anyway, so you fast forward, you get to this point of seeing the things that, at least as a kid, you've maybe convinced yourself, like, hey, this is what you need to do, to validate yourself or whatever that is. And you do it, and money is good, and your family's happy with you, and your friends all think you're cool, and all that stuff. That at least in the United States, people hold a very high, that's the value, I think. Being admired, having money, having people, friends and family who love you. And that could be something that I'm still kind of working through, because I'm still trying to figure that out too. I don't know. I'm just kind of talking here, but I knew that physically or geographically, I was like, I don't think this is it. I was pretty much convinced on Texas, and then we won't get into, relationship stuff, but someone else who I was involved with was saying, hey, we should get a house in Nashville. And I was like, well, I do love Nashville too, outside of Nashville, like northeast Nashville, because Nashville's expensive now. But kind of once everything went down, like leaving the last tour and kind of having, I guess, what you would call a bit of a nervous breakdown, that's when I kind of got back to square one, where I thought, oh, I have to start over. And where, my therapist, God bless her, was like, well, you're not starting from scratch, you're starting from experience. And I think that's a real nice kind of sentiment. And so I sat with that I sat at home for about a month, yeah, just stared at the wall for the most part. I started painting. That was kind of the main thing. I didn't even write songs, which is crazy. I just painted. And the people I did talk to, I played it off like, oh yeah, it's fine. It's whatever. I think at that point I was more bummed, like, oh man, like, 5 years of business. Like, the romantic thing, I get it. People fall in love with other people. That's life. But business, oof. Like, that was like, man, who does that? But some people do it. And that's another part of why I left. And so, yeah, anyway, I just sat with it, and heavy therapy, heavy meditation, heavy praying, which that was something new for me. But yeah, I did it, and it helped a lot. Changed my life. And, I couldn't help but think, like, maybe it's time to leave LA. And I told myself, like, I gave myself a certain amount of time, and I was like, if by the end of that, I think I should stay, then I'm going to stay, even if it's 1%. And at the end of that time, that's when they locked down LA for coronavirus. So I want to say like March 12th, maybe the 15th, somewhere in there. Second week of March. I don't know when exactly all this happened, or I can't remember. But yeah, and I couldn't believe it. I was like, well, if that's not a sign, I don't know what is. And I was like, well, you know what? I've had this dream of just saying, you know what? Let's go to Texas. So that's what I did. And at that point, I had started writing some songs. Quickly realized, like, oh, these are the best songs I've ever written. And it's like, well, I've got this Texas dream. Well, this whole album's about that, so that's what I'll call the album. And so that's the title of my third album, Texas Dream. And I thought it was appropriate to put out the title track first because, well, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. But I'm very excited. I've scrapped an entire album because that one I just thought it wasn't good enough, and I don't listen to it ever. I didn't think it was good. And then I made another album. I recorded another album, wrote another album that became an album for another artist, and an EP before that. And that was kind of the sound I was going for, but that just didn't feel like me. And I was like, oh, I'll just give that to someone else because, sometimes when you write a song, it's like, even when you write something, it might not be like what you as a human being are trying to convey. And that's something I want to talk about on this channel. And that's a big part of like why I want to start having these conversations, because I think a lot of people who are into the things that I've been a part of or the things that I've made probably feel like a similar way. Like maybe you're someone who just likes to watch or listen to the music or watch the videos, but a lot of people, and I know this from, reading messages from people, like a lot of people who watch the stuff that I do also make stuff. And I want to be able to like highlight them as well, or give any advice. I'm no genius, but I've at least seen like some crazy things that I truly didn't think I would see. And now I'm experiencing things that are like, oh man, like this is like kind of actually interesting. So maybe I should talk about it. We're living in a time now where this is possible. Like I wish when I was younger, like I could at least click on a video and just be like, hey, this person who's like artwork I'm into, like it'd really be cool to hear what they actually think. And you know, there's sort of a kind of an irony in that because, you know, everything up until literally right now, everything I've done was like a smokescreen, like professional wrestling, you know, creating characters idea just to confuse people, to try to convince them to like, you know, come to a show or spend money on whatever it was that I'm doing. And you know, it's kind of weird now. I think after this past year, which has been very, very humbling, to say the least, which I appreciate big time. I feel like it was like the meteor into the planet that really did need to happen. And I understand people have been affected by it. And it's horrible, but I'm saying like on a psychological level, I needed this last year to happen. Because it was like the final, like, it was the KO, I guess you would say, to my own ego. And it ended up being a beautiful thing. And I never in a million years would have expected it. Because my head was so far up my ass, it's just been a very interesting year. And for as weird as it's been, I'm actually excited at this point about where it's going. And typically in my life, it's been anytime anything horrible happens, it's usually followed up by, well, usually that's the inspiration for like, all right, well, it's pretty bad. But maybe I can make something great that will help life get better and hopefully help me come to a better understanding of what it means to be a better person, which will be a lifetime, I'm sure. And in this case, I've never experienced a life impact, certainly to that degree, or at least, you know, something that was extreme in that way. And I've never, as a result of that, experienced an equal and opposite extreme of love and companionship with my friends and with my family, to reinforce like, hey, you know, you're okay. And we saw exactly what happened, and yeah, it's crazy, but we're with you, man. And that just influenced this new album, which it's a lot. But I think it's been done in a very fair way. In the past, I was very bitter in my music in the past, and musically, I like it. And you'll hear it in how the chords are played, and the synth sounds, and how the drums are just always at 100% velocity. And this one's different. It's kind of interesting, and the whole country angle on it. I've been listening to a lot of country music, but like Hank Williams, Waylon Jennings, Johnny Cash, all that jazz. A lot of Alan Jackson too. I like him. He's fun. I heard a quote: country music is 3 chords and the truth. And that's the basis of Texas Dream to me. And I didn't hear that until I was almost done with the album, by the way. But it's true. I really, the last album I put out, like, it was we were trying to make the most ridiculous thing possible. And the fact that there's a Grammy nomination is just really ridiculous. Very appreciated. Thank you to everyone who voted for it. And if it wins, great, we'll see. But still, just very perplexing and very humbling. I don't think we deserve it. Although I do love that song, and that's one of my favorite things I've ever. It's weird. Part of me is like, yeah, I kind of knew. You wake up, you fire up the mug, you fire up the computer. I have an idea. Put it up. You do the thing. And it works. Anyway, I digress. It's just weird right now. It's a little weird. But that's life. And I hope that this is how these videos are. I'm going to do one every week. That's kind of what I'm going to do. I'm going to do one of these videos a week and just kind of talk about what's going on. There's a lot to fill in here, but I think that's about good. I just want to talk about stuff, If you've made it this far, I tip my hat. I'll wear a hat next time for you. Usually I've been wearing hats a lot, but not wearing one right now. But I commend you for making it this far. I'm very aware that for everyone watching this, there was a smoke screen up for a very long time. And that was intentional. That was to like sell you records and to convince you like, oh, hey, this is the best person in the world. And, to make it seem like, things were like so extreme and, Hollywood and all that stuff. And if me saying that is a letdown, I apologize, like, hey, like, magic isn't real. It's a bummer, when I first learned a bunch of magic tricks, I was like, oh, really? That's how they do it? And yeah, it's, everything's fake, everything's pretend. Santa Claus isn't real. I know for some people watching this, that'll probably be a first. But I got I think I'm just kind of like fed up with lying. And in my life, certainly for a considerable amount of years now, probably like 5-6 years, I took an oath to myself, to myself. I took an oath, and I was like, I'm just not going to lie to people anymore. And it was kind of crazy because it's like, I've got kind of a lot of followers, or at least people like subscribe to this kind of thing. You know, not the most in the world, I get it, but like enough who have made it to this point. And it's like, I don't feel like lying to them anymore. I don't want to play this character. I don't want to be like a professional wrestler anymore. And for a long time, it was funny to me. Like, can I be the biggest douchebag in the world? Can I be like, how funny? And that's how it was. How funny would it be to just be the most? And it was kind of a goal. Like, how many people can I get to hate me? And I think that's very reflective. You know, again, a year of therapy, you learn a lot. And it's like, hey, dude, why were you doing that? Why did you want to be the most hated person on the internet? Why was that? So, let's talk about that next week. How's that? Thank you for watching. I appreciate that. If you feel compelled, if you're watching this, you've probably already subscribed. If not, it helps. It's just me. I make my own songs, record them, make my own videos, set all this stuff up. That one too. It's very helpful. Titanic, Sinclair. You know where to find it. Anyway. Peace and love.